The most dangerous person is the one who gives you everything while expecting nothing in return, because eventually they'll have nothing left to give but their life. Late in January 2023, the community of Westridge, Colorado, gathered to say goodbye to David Bennett, beloved son, brother, and by all accounts a good man who worked 2 jobs to provide for his family. As his casket was lowered into the ground, his wife, Cassandra, dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief, accepting condolences with dramatic sighs. 2 hours later, Cassandra Bennett would be in the arms of another man in the same bed she had shared with her husband. And the only person who would witness this betrayal was Jason Bennett, David's younger brother, who had come to collect his brother's prized possession, a watch their father had given David before he died. What happened next would leave one person dead, a man facing murder charges, and a family destroyed by secrets that should have come to light long before a funeral turned into yet another tragedy. This is the story of what happens when loyalty is repaid with betrayal. When grief becomes rage, when the mask of a marriage slips to reveal the monster beneath, and how sometimes the real funeral isn't for the first person who dies, it's for the truth that died long before. If you're ready to uncover how a grieving widow went from planning a funeral to becoming the subject of one in just 72 hours, hit that subscribe button and notification bell right now, because the story of betrayal, revenge, and justice might be the most shocking we've ever told. To understand what happened in that bedroom after the funeral, we need to understand the men who should have been in it. David Bennett was born in 1982 in Westridge, Colorado, the oldest son of Eleanor and Robert Bennett. Raised in a household that valued hard work, respect, and family above all else, David absorbed these lessons early and carried them throughout his life. Former teachers described David as reliable, conscientious, the kind of student who never looked for shortcuts. He wasn't the star athlete or the valedictorian, but he was the student who showed up early to help set up for events, stayed late to clean up, and never complained about either. From an early age, David showed a sense of responsibility that distinguished him from his peers. Even in elementary school, recalled Mrs. Winters, his 3rd-grade teacher, David was the student who would notice when something needed to be done and just do it without being asked. Most children that age need direction, but not David. He had an innate sense of duty. This sense of duty would define David's life, sometimes to his detriment. As he moved through Westridge High School, David maintained solid B grades while working part-time at the local hardware store to save for college. Unlike many teenagers, he handed most of his paychecks to his parents, keeping only enough for basic necessities. When asked why by curious classmates, he would simply shrug and say, "My family needs it more than I do." When Robert Bennett died of a heart attack during David's senior year, the 18-year-old stepped up without hesitation. He deferred his college plans to help his mother with his younger brothers, Jason and Eric. He took over his father's shifts at the auto repair shop, learning the business from the ground up. Jason Bennett, younger by just 2 years, remembers this period vividly. David never complained, he told investigators. Not once. He'd work all day, come home to help Mom with dinner, then stay up studying so he could still take community college classes. He just handled it all. Eleanor Bennett, now a widow with 3 sons, leaned heavily on her oldest, perhaps too heavily. Looking back, she would later tell police through tears, "I put too much on his shoulders. Robert and I had always taught our boys that family comes first, that sacrifice is noble." But David took that lesson to heart in a way that consumed him. The weight of responsibility seemed to age David beyond his years. While his peers were enjoying college parties and finding themselves, David was calculating household budgets and fixing cars. The rare times he did socialize were usually limited to church functions or family gatherings, where he was often found in the kitchen helping with dishes or entertaining younger cousins. "It was like he didn't know how to just be young," said his cousin Rachel. "My friends would comment on how mature he was, how different from other guys his age. At the time, we thought it was admirable. Now, I wonder if we should have encouraged him to think of himself more. Despite these burdens, David managed to complete his associate's degree in business management through night classes spread over 4 years. By the time he turned 23, he had worked his way up from mechanic to assistant manager at Colorado Motors, the same shop where his father had once worked. Robert would have been so proud. His former boss, Mike Olai, told local news after David's death. That kid came in knowing nothing about cars and worked harder than men twice his age until he knew everything. Never asked for praise, never complained about the long hours, just kept his head down and did the work. It was around this time that the Bennett family dynamics began to shift. Jason had graduated high school and found work as an electrician's apprentice. The youngest brother, Eric, was in his final year of high school with a basketball scholarship to the University of Colorado on the horizon. Eleanor had secured full-time work as an administrative assistant at the local hospital, providing stable income and health insurance for the family. For the first time since his father's death, David had the opportunity to focus on his own future. Friends and family encouraged him to pursue his long-deferred dreams. Perhaps finish his bachelor's degree or take the vacation he'd always talked about. Instead, David channeled his energy into saving for a home, working overtime to build a substantial down payment. He told me he wanted to have something solid before he even thought about dating seriously, Jason recalled. That was David, always planning 3 steps ahead, always making sure the foundation was secure before building anything on it. By the time David turned 28, he had achieved his goal. The modest 3-bedroom ranch house in a quiet Westridge neighborhood wasn't luxurious, but it represented everything David valued: security, stability, and the promise of future family gatherings in a space he could call his own. The home, purchased entirely through his own efforts without family assistance, became a source of quiet pride for David. It was at this pivotal moment in his life that fate introduced him to Cassandra Parker, a decision that would ultimately lead to his demise. Cassandra entered David's life in 2010, at a time when he had finally established himself. By then 28, David had completed his associate's degree in business, was managing the auto shop his father had once worked at, and had saved enough for the down payment on his modest home. Cassandra was 25, already a single mother of 2 children by 2 different fathers. According to friends, David was immediately captivated by her beauty, her confidence, and what he perceived as her strength in raising children alone. Their meeting at a community fundraiser seemed almost orchestrated. Cassandra, working as a volunteer at the registration table, spent the evening flirting with David, who had been dragged to the event by coworkers. If you're enjoying this story, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It is free and won't cost anything, but it means the world to us. We're just a small channel trying to grow. Thank you. And back to the video. I remember thinking it was strange how quickly she zeroed in on him, said Tom Ramirez, David's colleague. There were plenty of single guys there, some with flashier cars and designer clothes. But after talking to David for 5 minutes, it was like she had locked onto a target. What Tom didn't realize, what none of them realized, was that Cassandra had done her research. Before the fundraiser, she had asked questions around town about eligible bachelors with stable jobs and good prospects. David's name had come up repeatedly. He owns his home outright, works 2 jobs, no vices, and treats his mama like a queen, Cassandra's friend Chantel had told her. Men like that are unicorns these days. What David didn't immediately recognize were the warning signs. Cassandra hadn't held a job for more than 6 months at a time. Her children's fathers were completely absent, providing no support. And her lifestyle, the designer clothes, the regular salon visits, the lavish birthday parties for her children, was funded primarily by a rotating cast of boyfriends and family members she would later cut off. The contrast between them was stark. While David drove the same reliable Honda he purchased used 5 years earlier, Cassandra showed up to their second date in a BMW she'd convinced her current boyfriend to lease for her, a relationship she promptly ended once David began showing serious interest. Friends tried to warn him. His brother Jason was particularly vocal about his concerns. "I told him she was using him," Jason later stated. But David just said everyone deserved a chance at happiness, that her kids deserved stability, that he could be what they all needed. What seemed like compassion to David appeared as weakness to Cassandra. In private conversations with friends, she referred to him as her meal ticket and retirement plan, joking that his devotion to family made him the perfect target. "Men who put family first are the easiest to control," she told her friend Chantel over drinks, unaware that Chantel's conscience would eventually lead her to share these conversations with investigators. "All I have to do is make my problems the family's problems, and he'll work himself to death trying to fix them." They married in 2012 after a whirlwind 8-month courtship. By then, Cassandra was pregnant with her third child by a man she had been seeing just before meeting David. According to multiple sources, David knew the child wasn't his, but promised to raise it as his own. That was David, his mother Eleanor told investigators through tears, always trying to save everyone else without thought for himself. The wedding itself foreshadowed the imbalance that would define their marriage. David, ever practical, suggested a simple ceremony at their local church, followed by a reception at his mother's house. Cassandra had other ideas. She wanted the works, recalled Brenda Hill, who helped plan the wedding. Designer dress, 5-tier cake, open bar, horse-drawn carriage, the works. When I gently suggested that perhaps something more aligned with their budget would be wise, she looked me dead in the eyes and said, "David will figure it out. He always does." And figure it out he did. David cashed in his modest 401k, paying the early withdrawal penalty without complaint. He picked up additional weekend shifts at a local grocery store, stocking shelves from midnight to 6 a.m. before heading to his regular job. He sold his prized collection of vintage car parts that he'd been gathering since his teens, all to give Cassandra the wedding of her dreams. He looked exhausted at his own wedding, Jason recalled. But when I mentioned it, he just smiled and said, "Did you see how happy she looks? Worth every penny." The changes began almost immediately after the wedding. First, Cassandra quit her part-time job at a local beauty supply store. "I need to focus on the children," she told David. Then came the complaints about their modest 3-bedroom home. "The kids need more space. We need a better neighborhood." To meet these new expectations, David took on a second job as a night security guard at a local warehouse. His already long days stretched longer. What most troubled David's family and friends was how quickly Cassandra began to isolate him from his support system. Sunday dinners at Eleanor's house, a tradition that had sustained the Bennett family through the hardest times, suddenly became inconvenient, Eleanor explained. First it was every other Sunday, then monthly, then just holidays. Eventually we were lucky if we saw him twice a year and never without her. Invitations for fishing trips with his brothers were declined. Text messages went unanswered for days, sometimes weeks. When David did respond, the messages were brief, often ending with explanations about needing to help Cassandra with some project or crisis. The transformation of their home was equally telling. Within months, the modest furnishings David had carefully selected were replaced with higher-end items. The practical, fuel-efficient Honda was traded for a luxury SUV that Cassandra insisted they needed for family safety. Credit card statements would later reveal that Cassandra spent an average of $3,000 per month on clothing, beauty treatments, and home decor, all while David worked 70-hour weeks to keep up with the bills. Friends who were once close reported seeing him less and less. Meanwhile, Cassandra's demands increased. There were expensive hair extensions, weekly nail appointments, Botox treatments, designer clothes. When asked by family how they could afford these luxuries, Cassandra would vaguely reference investments or side businesses that never seemed to materialize. More concerning to those who loved David was his growing isolation. Family dinners became less frequent. Calls went unanswered. His once close relationship with his brother Jason became limited to brief meetings when David could sneak away, his own words. According to Jason, despite Cassandra's attempts to separate David from his family, the bond between the brothers remained. Jason made it his mission to maintain contact, showing up at the auto shop during lunch breaks or arranging quick coffees when David was between jobs. "I knew something wasn't right," Jason later told police. "My brother was disappearing into this life where he just worked and handed over paychecks, but he wouldn't hear anything against her. It was like he'd committed to this path and couldn't admit it was destroying him." These clandestine meetings revealed troubling patterns. David would arrive looking increasingly haggard, dark circles under his eyes growing more pronounced with each visit. He lost weight, his once robust frame becoming gaunt. But most alarming was the change in his spirit. The quiet confidence that had defined him was replaced by nervous energy, his eyes constantly checking the time. His attention divided as though he was mentally calculating what tasks awaited him at home. "He jumped every time his phone buzzed," Jason recalled. "Once we were having coffee and he got a text from Cassandra asking where he'd put the remote control. He literally left mid-conversation to drive home and find it for her. 20 minutes later, he came back apologizing like he'd committed some terrible offense by having coffee with his own brother." By 2022, the physical toll was becoming evident. Medical records show David's doctor warned him about high blood pressure, stress-related symptoms, and exhaustion. He was prescribed medication he often couldn't afford to fill. During one medical appointment that David attended alone, his doctor noted concerns about potential emotional abuse. "Patient exhibits signs of extreme stress and anxiety when discussing home situation," the medical notes read. "Becomes defensive when asked about relationship dynamics. Recommends psychological evaluation, but patient declines, stating he doesn't have time for that." Multiple witnesses report seeing him falling asleep at church, at family events, even once at a stoplight. While David worked himself to exhaustion, Cassandra's social media told a different story. There were girls' trips to Denver, shopping sprees in Boulder, spa weekends, all while David covered shifts and cared for her children. These social media posts became a source of torment for David's family, who watched helplessly as Cassandra documented her lavish lifestyle, funded by David's labor while he deteriorated physically and emotionally. She'd post these photos of herself at some resort spa with hashtags like #blessed and #deservedit, Eleanor Bennett said. "Meanwhile, my son was working himself into an early grave to pay for it all." Perhaps the most revealing moment came during Christmas 2022, just weeks before David's death. The family had gathered at Eleanor's home, a rare occasion when Cassandra agreed to attend a family function. David arrived late, coming directly from his second job, carrying armfuls of expensive gifts that Cassandra had selected. She didn't even help him carry them in. Eric, the youngest brother, recalled, just sat on the couch on her phone while he made 3 trips to the car. When he finally sat down, she handed him a list of things she wanted him to pick up on the way home. When it came time to exchange gifts, Cassandra presented David with a tie purchased, as credit card statements would later reveal, with his own money. David gave her a diamond tennis bracelet that he had been making payments on for 6 months. The look on his face when she barely glanced at him before going back to her phone, Eric said, voice breaking. "That's when I knew something was seriously wrong. But when I tried to talk to him about it later, he just changed the subject." The last photo of David Bennett was taken just 3 days before his death at his auto shop's holiday party. Coworkers described him as upbeat as always, but noted he looked like he hadn't slept in years. No one knew these would be his final days. On January 9, 2023, David Bennett arose at 5 a.m. as he did every morning. According to cell phone records and witness statements, he prepared breakfast for Cassandra's children, now teenagers, who, by all accounts, had come to love and respect the man who had raised them despite having no biological connection. He made sure we had everything we needed for school. Tara, Cassandra's oldest daughter, later told investigators. Mom was always still asleep. He checked our homework, signed permission slips, all that. He did it all. The morning routine had become second nature to David. He would wake first, shower quickly, then prepare a hot breakfast for the children, something he insisted on despite their protests that cereal would suffice. He told me once that his dad always made sure they had a hot breakfast, no matter what, Tara recalled. He said it was one way to show love when you don't have much else to give. I didn't understand what he meant then. After breakfast, David would pack lunches meticulously, including notes of encouragement that the teenagers pretended to find embarrassing but secretly treasured. He would then drive them to school, using the commute time to ask about their plans, their friends, their dreams, conversations that Cassandra rarely engaged in. The last communication between David and Cassandra was a text exchange at 7:23 a.m. after he had dropped the children at school and arrived at the auto shop. David, don't forget I left the light bill money on the counter. It's due today. Cassandra, I need more than that. Getting my hair done at 11 o'clock. I don't get paid till Friday. The bill has to be paid today or they'll cut it off again. Figure it out. You know how important this appointment is. I've been waiting 3 weeks. According to co-workers, David spent his lunch break at a check-cashing place, taking out a high-interest loan to cover both the utility bill and Cassandra's salon appointment. It was his third such loan in 2 months. He looked defeated when he came back, recalled Sarah Williams, the shop's receptionist. I asked if everything was okay, and he just gave me that smile, you know, the one that doesn't reach his eyes, and said, "It will be." Those were the last words he ever said. At approximately 3:47 p.m., security footage from the auto shop shows David rolling out from under a car, clutching his head. He attempted to stand, staggered, and collapsed. Coworkers called 911 immediately, but by the time paramedics arrived, David Bennett was unresponsive. At West Ridge Memorial Hospital, doctors worked for over an hour to stabilize David, who had suffered a massive stroke. Medical records would later confirm what his doctor had warned. Years of untreated high blood pressure, chronic stress, and exhaustion had created a ticking time bomb in his brain. His blood pressure was dangerously high, Dr. Patel, the attending physician, noted in his report. Based on his condition and symptoms, this hadn't developed overnight. This was the culmination of years of sustained stress and inadequate medical care. While the medical team fought to save David's life, calls were placed to his emergency contacts. The first was Cassandra, who reportedly told the hospital secretary, "I'm in the middle of getting my hair done. Can't someone else handle this?" The second call went to Jason, who left work immediately and arrived at the hospital within 20 minutes. The third went to Eleanor Bennett, who would later describe those moments as the second worst of my life after losing my husband. Cassandra arrived at the hospital over 2 hours after being notified, her hair freshly styled, complaining about having to leave her appointment early. Jason Bennett, in contrast, had already spoken with doctors, contacted extended family members, and begun making arrangements for child care for Cassandra's children. Hospital staff noted the stark difference in their responses. Jason devastated and attentive, Cassandra irritated and constantly checking her phone. "I've been a nurse for 22 years, stated Nurse Garcia in her witness statement. You develop a sense for family dynamics, especially in crisis. The brother was torn apart, asking all the right questions about his brother's care. The wife seemed inconvenienced more than anything. While Jason made arrangements with hospital staff and contacted family members, phone records show Cassandra was texting with someone saved in her phone as T, later identified as Taryn Wilson. The exchanges were explicit, discussing plans to meet once everything settled down. One text sent by Cassandra at 9:17 p.m., less than an hour after her husband was pronounced dead, read, "It's done. He's gone. Now we don't have to worry anymore." Taryn's response, "About time. Now we can be together for real. That house is yours now." This cold exchange, discovered weeks later during the investigation, would cast a sinister light on what initially appeared to be a tragic but natural death. But in the moments following David's passing, the focus was on immediate arrangements and notification of family members. Eleanor Bennett collapsed when Jason called with the news, requiring medical attention herself. The youngest brother, Eric, drove through the night from his college campus in Boulder to be with his family. Friends and neighbors descended on the Bennett home with food and offers of support, a community rallying around a family known for their generosity in times of need. Only Cassandra remained strangely composed. Within hours of her husband's death, she had contacted his life insurance company, inquired about the policy payout process, and begun making an inventory of his possessions. "She asked me about his retirement accounts before I'd even had a chance to process that he was gone," Jason later told investigators. Who does that? In the days following David's death, Cassandra's behavior raised eyebrows. She argued with the funeral director about costs despite David having a life insurance policy specifically for funeral expenses. She rushed arrangements, opting for the earliest possible service date. According to the children, Cassandra spent more time going through David's financial documents than grieving. Tara reported overhearing her mother on the phone discussing the life insurance payout and how soon the check would come. "She was already talking about remodeling the house," Tara told police. David, wasn't even buried yet, and she was picking out new furniture online. Throughout this period, communication between Cassandra and Terrence Wilson intensified. They exchanged over 200 text messages in the 3 days between David's death and funeral. Many discussed their future plans, including renovations to the house and what to do with David's possessions. Perhaps most disturbing were the messages discussing David's children, not as grieving family members, but as potential obstacles to their plans. "What about the kids?" Terrence texted on January 11th. "They going to be a problem?" Cassandra's response was chilling in its callousness. "They'll deal. The older two are almost out of the house anyway. The little one doesn't even remember her real dad. She'll adjust." For teenagers who had just lost the only stable father figure they'd ever known, such dismissal would prove devastating, particularly for 10-year-old Lily, who had never known her biological father and had grown up believing David was her parent by blood. David Bennett's funeral was held at Grace Community Church, where he had attended since childhood. By all accounts, it was well attended, a testament to the many lives he had touched through his kindness, work ethic, and generosity. Multiple attendees later commented on Cassandra's appearance, a designer black dress that several people described as more appropriate for a cocktail party than a funeral, 6-inch heels, diamond earrings David had worked overtime for months to purchase, and freshly applied acrylic nails in a deep burgundy. Throughout the 2-hour service, witnesses reported Cassandra checking her phone repeatedly, sighing audibly during longer eulogies, and appearing impatient rather than grief-stricken. The eulogy delivered by David's brothers painted a portrait of a man whose generosity knew no bounds. Eric spoke of childhood memories, David sacrificing his own Christmas presents to ensure his younger brothers had what they wanted. Jason recounted how David had paid for his electrician certification when their mother couldn't afford it. When Jason delivered a moving tribute to his brother, security cameras caught Cassandra rolling her eyes. Jason's words would later seem prophetic. "My brother gave everything he had to those he loved," he said, voice breaking. "He gave until there was nothing left to give but his life itself. And in the end, that's what it cost him, his very life." The service concluded with a video montage of David's life, from childhood photos of a grinning boy with his brothers to recent images of family gatherings. Conspicuously absent were photos of David and Cassandra together, a detail that several attendees noted. When questioned about this later, the memorial video creator explained that Cassandra had provided only a single photo of herself with David despite requests for more. After the burial, tradition called for a repast at the Bennett family home, where mourners would gather to share memories and support the family. However, Cassandra cut this short, telling guests she was too overwhelmed to host for long despite Eleanor and her daughters-in-law having prepared all the food. By 2:45 p.m., Cassandra had ushered the last guest out, including David's immediate family. She claimed she needed to rest, but phone records show she immediately called Terrence Wilson, who was waiting nearby. "The coast is clear," she told him. "Bring champagne, the good stuff. We're celebrating." Meanwhile, Jason Bennett realized he had forgotten to collect a personal item of immense sentimental value, a vintage Omega watch that had belonged to their father, which David had worn every day until his hospitalization. "It wasn't about the monetary value," Jason later explained. "That watch was the last thing our dad gave David before he died. I couldn't bear the thought of Cassandra selling it or giving it to someone else. I knew my brother would want me to have it." The watch represented more than just a timepiece. Robert Bennett had received it as a gift from his own father upon becoming a father himself. He had passed it to David on his 18th birthday with the understanding that it symbolized the continuity of family responsibility. David had treasured it, having it carefully serviced every year despite the cost. At approximately 3:30 p.m., just 2 hours after David's funeral ended, Jason and his friend Darienne Miller arrived at the Bennett home. They noticed an unfamiliar Dodge Charger parked down the street but thought nothing of it at the time. Darienne stayed in the car while Jason approached the house. When he reached the front door, he noticed it was slightly ajar, unusual, especially on the day of a funeral when visitors might be expected. "I knocked and called out Cassandra's name," Jason later stated in his police interview. "When there was no answer, I got concerned. A door left open in that neighborhood wasn't safe, especially with my brother's belongings still inside." Jason pushed the door open further and stepped inside, calling out once more. The house was quiet except for faint sounds coming from the back, music playing low, then unmistakable laughter. "My first thought was that maybe she was having some kind of breakdown," Jason told detectives. "People grieve in different ways. I thought maybe she was watching videos of my brother or something to cope." Concerned both about Cassandra's emotional state and the unsecured house, Jason made his way down the hallway toward the master bedroom where the sounds were coming from. As he got closer, he could see the bedroom door was partially open, a sliver of light spilling into the darkened hallway. What Jason Bennett witnessed next would change multiple lives forever. Through the doorway, he saw Cassandra, still in her funeral outfit minus the shoes, straddling a shirtless man later identified as Terrence Wilson. They were sharing a bottle of champagne, the bed still covered with the same sheets David had slept in just days earlier. "I couldn't process what I was seeing," Jason later told police. "My brother wasn't even cold in the ground. We had just buried him hours ago. And there she was with this man, laughing, drinking, celebrating." The shock quickly gave way to rage. Jason pushed the door open fully, startling the couple. Cassandra scrambled off Taryn's lap, but rather than showing shame, her expression shifted to one of irritation. "What are you doing in my house?" she demanded, reaching for a robe. "You can't just walk in here." "Your house," Jason responded, his voice thick with emotion. "This is my brother's house. The brother we just buried today. What the hell is wrong with you, Cassandra?" The exchange escalated quickly. Jason reminded Cassandra that his brother had just been buried. According to his statement, Cassandra's response was chilling in its callousness. "David is dead. Get over it. I have to move on with my life." I need someone who can give me everything now." At this point, Terrence Wilson inserted himself into the confrontation. A background check would later reveal that Wilson had an extensive criminal history, including domestic violence charges and drug distribution. Standing at 6 feet 4 inches and weighing approximately 240 pounds, he physically intimidated the smaller Jason. "Get out before I make you regret coming here," Wilson reportedly threatened. "This is Cassandra's house now. You and your family ain't welcome." What Terrence Wilson didn't know was that Jason Bennett, despite his smaller stature, had served 4 years in the military before becoming an electrician. His combat training would prove decisive in the confrontation that followed. The confrontation quickly escalated to violence. Terrence lunged at Jason, shoving him against the hallway wall. Jason, though outweighed by at least 50 pounds, fought back with the adrenaline of rage and grief. As the two men grappled, Cassandra followed behind them, screaming at Jason to get out while urging Terrence to teach him a lesson. The struggle moved chaotically through the house, knocking over the memorial photos of David that had been displayed at the funeral just hours earlier. A side table shattered as Terrence slammed Jason into it, leaving Jason with a broken nose and cuts across his face. But Jason wasn't fighting to win. He was fighting to survive. When Terrence pinned him against the wall, Jason bit down hard on the man's forearm, causing Terrence to howl in pain and momentarily loosen his grip. Taking advantage of the distraction, Jason broke free and stumbled toward the front door with Terrence in pursuit, blood streaming from both men as the confrontation spilled out onto the front lawn. Seeing the altercation, Darian Miller exited the vehicle and ran to assist his friend. This seems to have triggered an escalation from Terrence Wilson, who, according to multiple witnesses, shouted, "I've got something for both of you." Security footage from a neighbor's doorbell camera shows Terrence Wilson running to the Dodge Charger parked down the street and retrieving what appears to be a handgun from the glove compartment. Cassandra can be seen on the lawn pointing toward Jason and Darian, who were attempting to retreat to their vehicle. The neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, a retired school teacher who had known the Bennett family for decades, began recording the incident on her phone while dialing 911. Her testimony and video evidence would prove crucial in the investigation that followed. "I couldn't believe what I was seeing," Mrs. Henderson later testified. "This was a quiet neighborhood. The Bennetts were good people. And here was this chaos erupting on their front lawn with poor David not even in the ground 24 hours. What happened next occurred in a matter of seconds. Terrence Wilson, gun in hand, ran back toward the house where Jason and Darian were now backing away with their hands up. Cassandra moved toward Wilson, either to stop him or to join him. Witness accounts differ. Wilson fired one shot, which missed its intended target of Jason Bennett. As he adjusted to fire again, Cassandra moved into the line of fire, perhaps attempting to position herself between the men or to grab the gun. The second shot struck Cassandra in the neck. She collapsed immediately. Darian Miller, who had first aid training from his military service, rushed to apply pressure to the wound while Jason called 911. According to the call transcript, Jason's first words to the dispatcher were, "Please help. My brother's wife has been shot. Please hurry." In the confusion, Terrence Wilson fled the scene in the Dodge Charger, taking the weapon with him. He would be apprehended approximately 6 hours later at a motel outside of Denver, attempting to cross state lines. Responding officers arrived within minutes, securing the scene and facilitating emergency medical transport for Cassandra. Detective Rachel Mendoza, a 12-year veteran of the Westridge Police Department, would later describe it as one of the most bizarre crime scenes I've ever processed. "Here was this home with funeral flowers still on the porch," she noted in her report. Inside, champagne glasses on the bedside table beside framed photos of the deceased. Wedding pictures on the walls, and in the middle of the living room, a woman in funeral attire bleeding out on an oriental rug. Nothing about it made sense until we started digging. Cassandra was transported to Westridge Memorial Hospital, ironically, the same hospital where her husband had died just 3 days earlier. She suffered catastrophic blood loss and oxygen deprivation to the brain. Though surgeons were able to repair the physical damage to her carotid artery, the neurological damage was irreversible. For 3 days, Cassandra remained on life support while her children, parents, and surprisingly David's family maintained a vigil. Family dynamics shifted dramatically during this period, with previously hidden tensions emerging. The hardest part was watching her children, Eleanor Bennett later told reporters. Whatever Cassandra had done, however she had treated my son, those kids were innocent. They had already lost the only stable father they'd ever known, and now they were losing their mother too. 1 week later, Cassandra Bennett was pronounced dead. The cause was listed as gunshot wound to the neck with resulting cerebral anoxia. She was 38 years old. In the aftermath of Cassandra's death, custody of her children became an immediate concern. The oldest 2 teenagers, Tara and Michael, had extended family on their father's side who came forward. 10-year-old Lily, however, had no biological relatives willing to claim her. It was heartbreaking, social worker Pauline Daniels recalled. This little girl had just lost both parents in the span of a week. The only stable home she'd ever known was gone. And there she was, sitting in the hospital waiting room with a small backpack of belongings, asking when she could go home. In a surprising turn of events, Eleanor Bennett petitioned for temporary guardianship of Lily. Despite the circumstances surrounding Cassandra's death and her treatment of David, Eleanor couldn't bear the thought of the child entering the foster system. David loved that little girl like she was his own, Eleanor explained. He wouldn't want her to suffer because of adult problems. What kind of grandmother would I be if I turned my back on a child my son had raised and loved? The court granted Eleanor temporary custody while permanent arrangements were considered. The decision wasn't without controversy. Cassandra's parents objected strongly, arguing that Eleanor's family was too closely tied to the tragedy. But character testimonials from community members and Lily's own stated preference to stay with Grandma Bennett swayed the judge's decision. As detectives investigated the shooting, they uncovered evidence that would cast the case in an entirely different light. A forensic examination of David and Cassandra's electronic devices revealed a relationship between Cassandra and Terrence Wilson dating back at least 18 months. The affair had not been casual. Hotel receipts showed weekly meetings, often during hours when David was working his second job. Financial records revealed Cassandra had been transferring money to Wilson, funds that came directly from David's accounts. In the 6 months before David's death, these transfers totaled over $17,000. We were able to trace a pattern of systematic financial exploitation, Detective Mendoza explained. Cassandra would claim various emergencies, car repairs, medical bills for the children, school expenses, and David would provide the money without question. Bank records show those funds being immediately transferred to Wilson's account or withdrawn as cash. More disturbing were text exchanges discussing David's health and specifically his life insurance policy. In a message dated November 2022, Cassandra wrote, "Doctor says his BP is through the roof. Matter of time before something happens, then we get the $250,000 and can do whatever we want." Taryn's response, "Need to make sure he keeps working both jobs. More stress equals faster results." The investigation expanded to include David's medical records, which revealed a troubling pattern. His doctor had prescribed blood pressure medication and recommended stress reduction, including potentially leaving his second job. Pharmacy records showed irregular filling of prescriptions, with gaps that aligned with periods when Cassandra had major expenses. The evidence suggests she was actively preventing him from taking medication that could have saved his life, explained District Attorney Lawrence Thompson. While perhaps not murder in the traditional sense, there appears to have been a deliberate effort to exacerbate his health conditions. Perhaps the most heartbreaking testimony came from Cassandra's oldest daughter, Tara. Now in the care of her biological father, who had reconnected following the tragedy, the 17-year-old provided investigators with insights into the household dynamics. Mom was always telling David he wasn't doing enough, Tara told detectives. No matter how hard he worked, it was never good enough. She'd hide his blood pressure medication sometimes, saying we couldn't afford it, then go get Botox the same day. Tara described witnessing her mother flush David's medication down the toilet on multiple occasions, claiming it was too expensive while simultaneously ordering luxury items online. When David would mention feeling unwell, Cassandra would accuse him of exaggerating to avoid work or family obligations. The week before he died, he was having these really bad headaches, Tara recalled, tears streaming down her face. He could barely see straight sometimes. Mom told him to take some Advil and get over it. Said they couldn't afford another doctor visit. Michael, Cassandra's 15-year-old son, corroborated his sister's account and added disturbing details of his own. He described overhearing his mother on the phone with Terrence, discussing David's deteriorating health with what seemed like anticipation. She'd say things like, "He's looking worse every day," or, "It won't be much longer now," Michael stated. I didn't understand what she meant then. I thought she was worried about him. Now I know she was waiting for him to die. The teenagers also revealed that Cassandra had begun moving David's belongings to the garage in the weeks before his death, claiming she was decluttering the house. In reality, she was making space for Terrence to move in, a plan they had apparently been discussing for months. Though David's death had initially been ruled natural causes, these revelations prompted a secondary examination. While the medical examiner couldn't definitively classify it as homicide, they noted that systematic psychological abuse and deliberate interference with necessary medical treatment likely contributed significantly to the decedent's fatal condition. As the investigation deepened, the community of Westridge found itself divided. Many who had known David since childhood were outraged, demanding justice for a man they viewed as having been exploited to death. While public opinion formed around the case, legal proceedings against Terrence Wilson moved forward. Wilson was charged with second-degree murder in Cassandra's death, as well as attempted murder of Jason Bennett, illegal possession of a firearm by a convicted felon, and a host of lesser charges. If convicted on all counts, he faced up to 60 years in prison. In a surprising legal strategy, Wilson's defense team attempted to shift blame to Cassandra, claiming she had manipulated him just as she had manipulated David. They presented evidence that Cassandra had promised Wilson the life insurance money and David's house in exchange for his companionship. "She told me she had nothing to do with his death," Wilson claimed in his statement. "But she sure seemed to be counting on it happening soon." Wilson's defense attorney, Claudia Rivera, painted a picture of Cassandra as the true villain, a master manipulator who had orchestrated everything, including the confrontation that led to her own death. "My client was a pawn in Cassandra Bennett's elaborate scheme," Rivera argued in her opening statement. She selected David Bennett for his financial stability and work ethic, systematically isolated and exploited him until his health failed, then immediately moved to replace him with Mr. Wilson, promising him the fruits of David's labor. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney James Morgan, countered this narrative forcefully. Regardless of Cassandra Bennett's motivations or actions, Mr. Wilson made his own choices, Morgan told the jury. He chose to engage in an affair with a married woman. He chose to accept money that he knew came from her hard-working husband. He chose to bring a firearm to the deceased's home on the day of his funeral. And most critically, he chose to discharge that weapon, resulting in Cassandra Bennett's death. The trial became a media sensation, with legal analysts debating the merits of Wilson's blame the victim defense strategy. Public sympathy remained firmly with the Bennett family, particularly after Jason's emotional testimony describing the scene he had witnessed in his brother's bedroom. I keep seeing it when I close my eyes, Jason testified, his voice barely above a whisper. My brother worked himself to death for that woman, and she couldn't even wait until his body was cold before replacing him. The champagne, the laughter, it was like they were celebrating his death. The prosecution's case was strengthened by the text message exchanges between Wilson and Cassandra, which demonstrated not only their affair but their apparent anticipation of David's death. Financial records showing Wilson's acceptance of funds traced directly to David's accounts established a clear pattern of exploitation. Wilson's criminal history worked against him as well. Previous domestic violence charges suggested a pattern of volatile behavior, while his status as a convicted felon in possession of a firearm undermined defense claims that he had acted impulsively rather than with premeditation. Halfway through the trial, in a move that shocked the courtroom, Terrence Wilson abruptly changed his plea to guilty on all charges except the attempted murder of Jason Bennett, which was reduced to aggravated assault. Legal experts speculated that the overwhelming evidence and negative public sentiment had convinced Wilson and his attorneys that a jury verdict would likely result in maximum sentencing. Later that year, after a 3-week trial and Wilson's mid-trial guilty plea, Judge Patricia Forner delivered her sentence: 40 years with possibility of parole after 25. Mr. Wilson, the court cannot ignore the circumstances that brought us here today, Judge Forner stated during sentencing. While Ms. Bennett's actions toward her late husband were reprehensible, they do not justify or mitigate your own criminal behavior. You chose to insert yourself into a grieving family's life with tragic consequences. For Jason Bennett, the verdict brought mixed emotions. Nothing brings my brother back, he told reporters outside the courthouse, his mother and younger brother standing supportively at his side. David deserved so much better than what he got. He gave everything to people who just took and took until there was nothing left. The aftermath of the trial brought significant changes for all involved. The Bennett family established the David Bennett Foundation, which provides education about financial abuse and supports victims regardless of gender. The foundation's first initiative funded a financial literacy program at Westridge High School, teaching young people to recognize the warning signs of financial exploitation in relationships. Eleanor Bennett, now raising 10-year-old Lily, found purpose in continuing David's legacy of generosity while advocating for greater recognition of male victims of domestic abuse. Lily, though still processing the trauma of losing both parental figures, thrived under her grandmother's care and became an ambassador for the foundation, speaking to youth groups about healthy relationships. Jason Bennett used his portion of David's life insurance payout, which investigators determined Cassandra had not been able to change the beneficiaries on, to open his own electrical contracting business, naming it Bennett Brothers in honor of David. The business made a point of hiring single parents and offering flexible scheduling to accommodate family responsibilities. The younger brother, Eric, established a scholarship in David's name at the University of Colorado, specifically for students who had delayed their education to support family members. The first recipient was a 32-year-old single father who had put his own education on hold to raise his children after his wife's death. Today, David and Cassandra Bennett lie buried in the same cemetery, though Cassandra's family chose a plot far from David's. On David's headstone, beneath his name and dates, is an epitaph chosen by his family. He gave everything until there was nothing left to give but his life itself. Cassandra's grave bears only her name and dates, a starkly simple marker for a woman who demanded luxury in life but found only infamy in death. The children Cassandra left behind found different paths forward. Tara and Michael reconnected with their biological fathers, rebuilding relationships that had been discouraged during Cassandra's life. Though initially resentful of their mother's manipulation and deception, both eventually worked with therapists to process their complex feelings about their upbringing. The hardest part is remembering the good times, Tara shared in a documentary produced about the case, because there were good times. She was still my mom. But then I remember what she did to David, how she used him until there was nothing left. And I get angry all over again. I'm still trying to reconcile those two versions of her. Lily, who has now taken the Bennett name legally, keeps a photo of David, the only father she ever knew, beside her bed. Though her memories of him have begun to fade with time, the stories told by Eleanor and David's brothers keep his spirit alive for her. He taught me how to ride a bike, she told an interviewer on the 2nd anniversary of his death. He never yelled, even when I fell and scratched his car. He just helped me up and told me everyone falls sometimes, but the important thing is getting back up. The case of David and Cassandra Bennett has been studied in criminal justice and psychology courses across the country. It has become a touchstone for discussions about the less recognized forms of domestic abuse, financial exploitation, emotional manipulation, medical neglect, particularly when the victims are men. Legislative change came as well. The state of Colorado passed David's Law in 2024, expanding the definition of domestic abuse to explicitly include financial exploitation and medical neglect, and providing enhanced penalties when such abuse results in serious bodily harm or death. The tragedy of David Bennett isn't just that he died too young, or even that his death might have been hastened by those who should have loved him most. The true tragedy is that throughout his life, David never realized his own worth beyond what he could provide for others. He was raised to believe that a man's value lies in his ability to sacrifice for his family, a noble principle that, when exploited by the wrong person, became a weapon used against him. While Cassandra and Taryn saw him as merely a means to financial security, they failed to recognize the genuine treasure they had, a man of integrity, compassion, and unwavering commitment. My son believed in the traditional values his father taught him. Eleanor reflected on the 3rd anniversary of David's death. Work hard. Take care of your family. Keep your promises. Those aren't bad values, but they need to be reciprocated. They need to exist within relationships built on mutual respect and love, not exploitation. The story of David Bennett serves as a powerful reminder that giving should have limits, that self-sacrifice should not come at the expense of self-preservation. It reminds us to check on our strong friends, the ones who never complain, the ones who are always there for others. Because sometimes beneath that strength lies a vulnerability that those with ill intentions are all too willing to exploit. Perhaps the most enduring legacy of David Bennett's story is the conversations it started in homes, in classrooms, in therapists' offices, about the true meaning of love versus exploitation. About the importance of setting boundaries, even with those we care for deeply, and about recognizing that sometimes the most dangerous predators aren't strangers in dark alleys, but partners sharing our beds. As Detective Mendoza, who remained close with the Bennett family long after the case closed, put it, David Bennett's story isn't just about how he died. It's about how he lived, giving everything he had to people who didn't deserve it. If his story helps just one person recognize when giving becomes dangerous, when sacrifice becomes self-destruction, then perhaps his death wasn't entirely in vain. In Westridge, Colorado, David Bennett is remembered not as a victim, but as a reminder that kindness should be met with kindness, that love should build up rather than deplete, and that everyone, even the strongest among us, deserves someone who gives as much as they take. The David Bennett Foundation continues its work today, spreading this message to communities across the country. Their slogan, taken from Eleanor Bennett's words at her son's funeral, has become a powerful reminder to those caught in cycles of one-sided giving. Your worth is not measured by what you provide. It is inherent in who you are. And perhaps that is the most important lesson of all, that true love doesn't drain you, it sustains you. That healthy relationships involve mutual support, not one-sided sacrifice. That sometimes the most selfless act is setting boundaries that protect your own well-being. David Bennett learned this lesson too late, but his story ensures that others might learn it in time. And in that way, his legacy of giving continues, not through the depletion of self, but through the enlightenment of others. If you or someone you know is in a relationship characterized by financial control, emotional manipulation, or any form of abuse, resources are available. The National Domestic Violence Hotline provides support for all victims of domestic abuse and can be reached at 1-800-799-7233. Remember, no one deserves to be exploited, regardless of gender. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and for those who truly care about you is to recognize when giving has become dangerous and find the courage to stop. David Bennett's legacy lives on in the lives he touched, the lessons his story teaches, and the changes his tragedy inspired. And that perhaps is the truest form of immortality any of us can hope for. To leave the world a little better, a little wiser than we found it, even if the cost, as in David's case, proves ultimately too high. The story stands as a testament to the complexity of human relationships and the devastating consequences when love becomes one-sided exploitation. Through his death, David Bennett continues to give, this time offering the gift of awareness to those who might otherwise find themselves trapped in similar circumstances. His memory serves as both warning and inspiration, a warning about the dangers of boundless self-sacrifice, and an inspiration to value ourselves as much as we value others. In remembering David Bennett, we honor not just his life, but the lives his story may yet save.